I'm Raphael Kaplinsky. I currently work at the Open University in England, and previously I worked at the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex. I returned to Sussex University as of 2015 and will be at the Science Policy Research Unit.
Very good. Maybe talk a little bit about your current research involved with GVCs.
Can I go back a bit?
Absolutely.
I go back a fair way on the GVC area. In 1999, when I was at Sussex, we convened a meeting of a community working on GVCs, at that time called Global Commodity Chains. Gary, Tim and others came to Sussex. We brought people from all over the world, and it was at that point that the discipline, if you like to call it, made the transition from what was called global commodity chains to global value chains. And I think it was one of the inflection points in the global value chains literature. So I guess I have quite a long association. I haven't worked in the GVC field continuously. I've dipped in and out of it, but in the last 2 or 3 years, for reasons which we can discuss, I've come back to think again about GVCs.
Okay. In terms of this summit itself, have you learned anything that's surprised you, or?
Of course, one always learns things that surprise one, and all of our views are portioned to us as individuals, but we pick them from the ether. Mm-hmm. So what are the big things I've learned? I suppose the opening session I thought was very powerful. Mm-hmm. And without singling out particular individuals, one of the comments made by Will Milberg I found especially helpful. And that was the view, trying to understand why GVCs have become the flavor of the month. And of course, one way of looking at this is to say that it's such a powerful analytical tool, it opens so many windows, it's obvious, it becomes an important way of looking at the world. But Will's point was a rather different one, which is that the corporate sector has basically overwhelmed the state in countries and across the world. And many of the international organizations feel powerless in the face of the corporate sector. And part of the strength of the corporate sector is its global footprint and its ability to move things around the world. So Will's point was that the interest in GVCs and international organizations is a defensive one. It's not an offensive one. And I was persuaded by that. I found that very helpful. The second thing I've observed rather than having learnt is how the GVC framework is losing some of its sharpness. Mm-hmm. Now that everybody says they're working on GVCs, I think some of the key strengths of the analytical framework of GVCs, and Gary's work was very important in that, are being diluted. So the key, for me at any rate, the key advance in analytical thinking was in 1994-5, when Gary made the point that global value chains are essentially around power and the power of lead firms. And we've retreated from that. Now we're talking about global value chains as just the global fracturing of production. Just to move on a bit, I think that gives the GVC research community a big challenge, which is we need to help ourselves and help the international organizations understand that there are global value chains as global production networks, but they are governed value chains in which power relations become important and lead firms are important, and we're in a messy situation at the moment where those two things are being conflated.
You mentioned the messy state. You mentioned there was an inflection point where global commodity chains became global value chains. Yeah. Gary likes to say right now that he sees us at that another inflection point. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. There's always a danger of reducing a change to a single direction, but I would like to point to two. The first one is begin with two anyway, is the consequences of the decline in the old northern economies, or the stasis, and the rise of emerging countries and southern countries. And I think we don't have time to talk about that, but that has significant implications for the organization of global value chains. I think the second one is we need to think more carefully about different families of value chains. And Gary has in the past made the point, and Gary and others, the difference between buyer and producer-driven change. Mm-hmm. Notwithstanding that, although I think there has been a tendency for change to become increasingly buyer-driven, the bifurcation I see now of relevance is between what we call additive value chains, that is value chains in the resource sector, and vertically specialized value chains, which is the iPhone fractured, broken up, and produced all over the world. And that's important because the policy implications are substantially different across these two sets of chains.
Great. I appreciate your time. I'll let you get back to the session.